So how much time do we have? My best guess is somewhere around 35 years to meltdown, or to eventual meltdown at the present burn rate. That doesn't mean we have 35 years to continue driving our cars home. It means we have 35 years to change how our civilization works. So what do we do? Develop renewable energy sources to meet 75% of our energy needs. That's wind, solar, tidal, run-of-river hydro, and for a lot of people it's nuclear. And the answer may simply be the answer is blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. It could be that wind turbines in the long run offer the solution. For instance, on the Hecate Strait near the Queen Charlotte Islands, British Columbia has the capacity to produce twice the energy that it's currently producing with all of its electric dams. And it's a tremendous resource. It's waiting to be exploited, it's commercially viable, and it can be done with the right will. So, shipping food to your plate, that's the topic. We wanted to look at local food and buying local organic. The average item of food that you buy in a normal grocery store, such as Safeways or True Value, has traveled 1,500 kilometers to get to you. And the amount that food has traveled varies from 5 kilometers or 100 kilometers up to around 3,500 kilometers if it's a banana or an avocado or a bottle of wine from Australia. How much CO2 that shipping of food produces depends on how it was shipped. This is really the most interesting thing to me. These numbers, just spend a little bit of time with them. They're terrifying. Air freight shipping produces almost a half a pound of CO2 to move 1 pound of goods 100 kilometers. Air travel currently produces 1 billion out of the 35 billion tons of CO2 emissions that we produce. As a people, there are 10,000 jet airplanes in the sky at all times, burning out CO2, and the CO2 that they emit has twice the climate effects because it's high in the atmosphere. Small trucks, almost as much as airplanes, they produce 0.34 pounds of CO2 per pound of travel 100 kilometers. Big trucks, the ones that bring most of our vegetables up from California, produce 0.17 pounds. Cargo ships, a little more than trucks, 0.2 pounds, and trains are amazing. Trains don't produce much CO2. They're way down at 0.012 pounds. Conclusions: buy local wine, beer, and food, and take the train to visit your friends if you can, if you have the patience. It's tough going. Your own personal carbon footprint, you're all running an average of 18.5 pounds, but in the case of most of you, probably about 5 of those pounds are your airplane travel. Okay, a year of local eating and drinking. How much CO2 can you save if you were to buy entirely local BC grown produce? So this is guessing on consumption, and so total juice, beer, and wine. In my case, it would be total beer and wine. It's 700 pounds a year, roughly. That's half a liter a day. I hate to admit to that, but I think it's a rough guess on people's consumption. Total food consumption, these are guesses from the internet. 200 pounds of produce, 150 pounds of meat and fish, 200 pounds of carbohydrates in the form of pasta and bread and rice, 200 pounds of milk and dairy products, and 200 pounds of fruit. So it's a rough guess for a typical person. So total food, 950 pounds for somebody kind of like me. So this is actually, these figures are from a website called lifecycleproject.ca, which was done right here in Victoria. So produce relative, or juice, beer, and wine, 780 pounds of CO2. Interesting thing here is this, and this is the only thing I really want you to take away from this, other than that you should buy local organic food. It's this: every time you buy a pound of beer or wine that's imported, it's 1 pound of CO2 for every pound of beer or wine that you buy. And then I also want you to take away the fact that for every pound of imported vegetables or fruit from California or avocados from Chile that you buy, on average is 3 pounds of CO2 per pound of food that you buy. Scary numbers, but that's the way it is. So on your produce, it's 350 pounds for that typical person. Meat, 820 pounds, pasta, bread, rice, 545 pounds, milk, eggs, and cheese this time, no cheers on this one. It's 900 pounds, fruit, 275 pounds of CO2. So with our normal habits of consumption that have evolved in the last 30 years, we're consuming 3,650 pounds of CO2 in the form of food. And that's every year, and that's just the direct transportation cost of the food. That doesn't count the petroleum-based fertilizers that went into the making of the food, the impact on rivers that came from the runoff from those fertilizers. It doesn't count the methane produced from cows, sheep, and horses. It doesn't count the effects of their effluent on rivers, like the Mississippi River, which is completely choked with the effluent from feedlots. Just the atmospheric effects are there, so that you can sure see that if you eat local organic food, you're being a lot friendlier to the planet. So if you put your hands up in front of your eyes to look at these figures, maybe you should put your hands up in front of your eyes when you look at the cost of local organic food and just accept it as a necessary premium on sustainability. How the heck can you ever get back to a sustainable life if you happen to live in 2007 and be a normal person? That's really what we've been struggling with at the Cool Community Movement, and it's what I'm struggling with in a lot of the work I do as an architect in society, trying to design sustainable buildings and communities. How the heck do we ever get back on side with Mother Nature? Is there any hope at all for us? And most days I don't think there is, but theoretically, what we can do, you can seal your house and you can make sure that you don't live in too large a building. The average house in BC uses 10,000 kilowatt hours of energy to heat and light it every year. And if you share it with 4 people, your share is, or 5 people, your share is 2,000 kilowatt hours, which is 1.7 tons. Your appliances use roughly the same amount of energy, and if you can see your way clear to hang your clothes up to dry using a smaller refrigerator, use a high-efficiency refrigerator, use a high-efficiency dishwasher, you can get that number down to 1.7 tons. If you could see your way to driving a car that wasn't a big muscle car, or pickup truck, or whatever, if you could see your way to driving a car that was highly efficient and could achieve 40 miles to the gallon, you could get your numbers down to 1.3 tons. And that's another really tough decision, because marketing is, we identify so closely with the vehicle that we drive. Marketing tells us that it says something about who we are, and we've been convinced in the last 30 years to drive big cars. As soon as you go out of the city, everyone's driving a pickup for some reason. There's almost never anything in the back of them, but they're driving pickup trucks. And those things get about 10 miles to the gallon. That's horrible, actually, but that's the way it is. Manufactured goods, try to keep your packaging down, try to keep your consumption down, 0.3 tons. And if you go to local food, you're left with about a half a ton by the time you buy Jürgen's favorite wine from South Africa, and the salt and pepper, and the wonderful out-of-season asparagus you can't resist in February. You can't deprive yourself that much. You're somewhere down around half a tons. Your personal share of commercial emissions at 2 tons, and for some reason you've somehow seen your way clear to not take an airplane ride. You're down at 7.5 tons. You're almost sustainable. You've made a 55% reduction on your current levels of consumption as a Canadian. You're somewhere where people think we need to be in about 10 or 20 years to avoid disaster. So that's the life we have to live. There is a, or we could choose to not live it and just let it go and watch the earth twist and turn as the climate changes dramatically. One of the most heartbreaking realizations for me was that probably the polar bears are gone, thanks to us. And it was a moment of horror on my part to realize that this civilization that I had been part of creating, and you can't be an engineer or an architect in society without thinking that you're doing something good. But it was horrible to realize that all the good things that I've been part of doing were going to extinguish polar bears, almost without any chance at all at this point of turning it the other way. Okay, so that's the sad part of the evening. Now I want to ask Shanti to come up and share some good news with us.